and we'll get started. Do we have quorum yet, Laura?
Chair, we do have quorum and we are live streaming and we are recording, so we are set whenever you are.
All right, well, why don't we start? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order the Napa Valley Transportation Authority meeting to order. My name is Alfredo Pedroza, Chair, along with our Vice Chair, Liz Salesi, who cannot be here today. Let's please do the roll call. You know what, Laura, before we do that, if you all could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
And before that, could I run the preamble?
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Due to Governor Newsom's state of emergency declaration regarding COVID-19 and in accordance with Assembly Bill 361 allowing remote meetings, this meeting will be accessible via teleconference and Zoom for all participants. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the NVTA website at a later time. The chair will call upon board members and all speakers by name, ask that they speak clearly and state their names before giving comments or remarks.
It seems like it might have froze, Laura.
Stand by.
Okay.
I'm going to read the rest if that is easier for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Where did we pick off? This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the NVTA website at a later time. The chair will call upon board members and all speakers by name, ask that they speak clearly and state their names before giving comments or remarks. Board members and members of the public participating by Zoom who wish to speak or use the raise hand feature or *9 on their phone.
Right? Does that conclude the preamble, Laura?
It does.
All right.
And I will screen share our flag for your Pledge of Allegiance.
All right. Thank you for improvising. All right. If you could all join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, liberty and justice for all. Thank you, directors. And thank you to members of the public for joining us as well. Or let's proceed with roll call.
Leon Garcia.
Here.
Mark Joseph.
Here.
Chris Canning. Gary Kraus. Scott Sedgley.
Here.
Alfredo Pedroza.
Here.
Belia Ramos.
Here.
Paul Doring.
Here.
Jeff Ellsworth.
Here.
John Dunbar.
Here.
Eric Knight.
Here.
And Doug Weir.
Here.
Thank you. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, directors. Let's move on to item 4, the adoption of the agenda. We've all had a moment to take a look at the agenda. Directors, any questions or comments on the agenda? I don't see any hands raised. Or do we have any members of the public that wish to make public comment on the adoption of the agenda?
We do not.
All right, at this point, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Dunbar moved.
We have first by
Second.
Dunbar,
Second.
second by Garcia. Roll call vote, please.
Leon Garcia.
Here. Yes.
Mark Joseph.
Yes.
Scott Sedgley.
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza.
Yes.
Belia Ramos. Belia.
Yes.
Thank you. Paul
Yes.
Doring.
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth.
Yes, and I just saw Director Canning come on. I don't know if he was registered yet.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Eric Knight.
Yes.
John Dunbar.
Yes.
And Chris Canning.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Laura. Let's move on to public comment. This is the time when anyone can address the authority on any item that's not on today's agenda, which we have purview over. Or do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
All right, so with that, we're going to proceed to item 6, chairpersons, board members, MTC, and ABAG update. Let me turn to our ABAG representatives. Anything to report? All right, Director Garcia or Director Ramos, anything to report from the ABAG side? Okay.
I have nothing to report today.
I take that as no from both. So I'll proceed with MTC updates. Lots going on at MTC yesterday. I had an opportunity to participate on a town hall with Senator Dodd regarding transportation, and very timely town hall talking about, the toll legislation around State Route 37. That's something that's important to us, especially when the diversion effect does impact County. So Senator Dodd did introduce that legislation, which I think is SB 1050, which looks at the tolling element of State Route 37 to do some of those short-term and long-term improvements. We've also been having a lot of meetings with our state legislators. There's been some legislation introduced around payment plans for those individuals that are crossing our bridges. Believe it or not, the total violation amount is north of $10 to $20 million in terms of toll evasion and late fees and penalties. MTC's taken a proactive approach. We've already been reducing the fees from toll violations, but we want to make sure that any payment plan that is done, there's some type of criteria so it doesn't impact, the toll revenue. We're looking at who is using these, who is not paying their tolls to make sure that we help those that actually need help. So again, Assembly Member Ting, I believe, introduced legislation. We're talking with him tomorrow around that. And then there's also been some discussion. We're going to hear about, mapping and wayfinding later today from MTC. But Senator Becker introduced some legislation around seamless transportation, which looks at the coordination of, schedules, fares, wayfinding and mapping. And again, we appreciate the desire and the initiative of our state legislators to take a leadership role, but we need to make sure it works with us locally as, Kate has to implement these objectives. It needs to be done in a way that they can actually be achieved. So again, great initiative by our state legislators, but we're somewhat kind of reacting to some of the legislation happening to us, but we do believe it's well intended to produce outcomes. And at the end of the day, it's about increasing ridership in public transit, and everything we do should be geared towards that. So again, that's a quick high level overview of pressing issues at MTC. Happy to answer any questions from any directors. I don't see any. And then the last part I will say, both Director Miller and myself continue to work with MTC around trying to support American Canyon and some of the improvements along Highway 29 in terms of finding some money to advance our environmental work that needs to be done for some of the projects in American Canyon. So at this point, if there's no further questions from any directors, I don't see any hands raised. And Laura, do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
All right. Director Joseph, you look somewhat interested in asking a question, or am I just...
As it turned out, I got an interesting email. So
Okay.
There's
No worries.
Multitasking and I got busted. Sorry.
No worries. All right. So I don't see any other questions. Let's move on to Director's update. Director Miller.
Well, good afternoon. Let's see. Well, good news is that we were able to fill one of our open positions. I want to introduce the board to Valerie Walston. Valerie, you want to turn your camera on so they can see you? Valerie joined at the NVTA team in January and will be serving as NVTA's communications and marketing analyst. Valerie comes to NVTA with 20 years of experience, from managing voter outreach programs to serving in various marketing and public information roles for government agencies and the University of California, Santa Barbara. Valerie has a Bachelor of Arts degree in government communications from Sweetbriar College and a certification in professional social media from Sonoma State University. Valerie is currently a resident of Santa Rosa, but is looking for a place in Napa. So welcome, Valerie. We're so thrilled to have you on board. I wanted to let the board and the public know that we are having a groundbreaking event on Friday, February 18th at 10 o'clock for the Vine maintenance groundbreaking. Congressman Thompson will be in attendance, as well as Federal Transit Administration Region 9 Administrator Ray Tellis, the Executive Director of the California Transportation Commission, Mitch Weiss, and the Deputy Executive Director of Policy from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, Alex Bockelman. I hope many of you will be able to join us. I wanted to give you a heads up that from Tuesday, February 22nd through Friday, February 25th, from 9 to 5 p.m., Caltrans will be implementing one-way traffic controls on State Route 29, just north of St. Helena, within the Elm Tunnel to remove 11 elm trees, which are infected with tree rot and Dutch elm disease. Motorists are advised to expect delays, exercise caution while driving in this area. All work scheduling is subject to weather conditions and permitting. Members of the public can go to 511.org to get updates on the project. NVTA is partnering with the Yountville Chamber, the Workforce Alliance, and Napa Valley Employers on the Napa Chamber Coalition Job Fair, which is being held on Tuesday, February 22nd from 10 to 1 p.m. at Shandon, located at 1 California Drive in Yountville. In addition to tabling at the event to solicit interest in NVTA and TransDev employment positions, NVTA will also provide free rides on the Vine all day for everybody on February 22nd. The Calistoga, we're going to hear a little bit more about the Calistoga St. Vine Trail project from Danielle, but I just want to give you a heads up that the bids were, the invitation for bids was posted on December 23rd, and we opened the bids on February 2nd. We received 7 bids ranging from a low of 11.8 million to a high of 16.6 million. The initial low bid was 12.585 million, but we found an addition error in the second lowest bidder submittal. And so we have asked I believe the 4 lowest bidders to evaluate their bids and to respond by Friday at 5 o'clock on whether or not their bids are still good. We have followed the typical discrepancy language in our invitation to bid to make sure that we were following all the rules, and that is what we came up with. I did also want to point out that even with the lowest bid coming in at $11.8 million, we still have roughly a $3.5 to $4.3 million shortfall in this project, and we're working with the jurisdictions to identify ways to address the funding gap and potentially to help finance maybe the smaller jurisdictions' payments over a couple of years. I'm going to conclude my report with each month I acknowledge staff for the work they do. I would like to remind the board that we continue to be very short staffed, both because of open positions, but also because of intermittent challenges associated with the pandemic. Several staff members have taken on various roles that Sanjay Mishra performed, including project management. And today the board will receive a detailed update about the projects currently in construction or pre-construction phases from Danielle. These include the Imola Park and Ride, Sosville Junction, the Vine Maintenance Facility, the Calistoga St. Helena Vine Trail, the State Route 29 Project Initiation Document in American Canyon, and the State Route 29 Napa Valley Forward Up Valley Intersection Improvements, and State Route 37. I would like to acknowledge Danielle Schmitz, Rebecca Shank, and Alberta Esqueda for taking on project management responsibilities in addition to their other full-time jobs of managing the Vine Transit System, pursuing competitive grant funding, overseeing funding programs, overseeing the production and implementation of our many plans, participating in federal and state regional workshops and meetings to stay up to date on funding opportunities, planning, and policy trends. What they do every day without these additional assignments is impressive. The project management work is very challenging. Our learning curves are extremely steep right now, but the team is very smart and they are fearless. Danielle, Rebecca, and Alberta, thanks for all you do every day, but I especially appreciate your commitment as the agency navigates this very turbulent time. Thank you. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Kate, for acknowledging staff. Valerie, welcome, and go Seawolves. All right, I see some questions from directors. Director Dunbar.
Yes, Kate, could you just update us on Imola? I drove by there yesterday, and there is significant work happening. If you could just give us a little bit more progress report and timeline on that, because it is significant.
Yeah, sure it is. They are moving quickly, and thankfully the weather is cooperating. Danielle is going to give you a more detailed project update on all of our projects early on in the board meeting, but I just wanted to let you know that they're ahead of schedule. We've had a few extras in the project, but we're working through those. And I think there's just general cooperation between the construction team, the construction managers, and NVTA. So it's going ahead quickly.
All right, thank you, Director Dunbar. I don't see any other director with questions. Okay, thank you very much for a thorough update. So at this point, we're going to move on to item 8 in our agenda. This is presentations. This is an informational item only. 8.1 MTC Transit Mapping and Wayfinding Project. And I believe we have staff from MTC that is going to take it away. Shauna.
Yeah, hi, and I'm going to share my screen if I'm able to. See. And get the presentation. Can you all see the screen?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Shauna Callow, and I'm an assistant director at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and I'm here to share an information update on the Regional Mapping and Wayfinding Project. With more than 24 transit operators in the Bay Area, each with their own approach to mapping, wayfinding, and other information, transit riders face a confusing and inconsistent experience. It's challenging for riders who are considering an unfamiliar operator or are transferring in a multi-operator trip. And it's a very high barrier for those who have disabilities, are non-English speakers, or are new to transit. But a harmonious experience is possible in the Bay Area. With common regional mapping and wayfinding, both riders and operators would benefit from standardized and consistent signage and information. In this illustration, you see that the common signage and structures provides a recognizable and unified system which supports seamless transfers between modes and operators. The Regional Mapping and Wayfinding Project has 3 main goals. First, provide better information for travelers that is dependable, predictable, and recognizable so they can learn it once and use it anywhere. Second, better ways of working for service providers by sharing common parts, applications, and standards. Finally, better outcomes for the region by improving health outcomes and sustainability through increased ridership. Riders and their experience are at the core of the project, and several research methods have been used to gain insight since the project started in 2017. Recent focus groups found that standardized information and graphics and unified branding make travelers feel more confident and make transit easier to navigate. Standardized graphics and symbols were especially important for non-English speakers. During phase 1 of the project, MTC began initial outreach with operator staff and developed a prototype regional transit map to set the vision for what could be done. During phase 2, which we recently completed, we explored several options for harmonized mapping and wayfinding. These options, or tiers, included varying levels of graphic harmonization and geographic implementation. We then developed a business case to consider the strategic value, economic benefit, and financial impact of these options as a potential regional approach. The business case found that a new common transit information brand and region-wide implementation of standardized mapping, information, and signage at rail, ferry, regional bus, and all local bus environments provides the greatest strategic benefits, strongest incremental revenue generation potential, and highest return on investment. Based on these findings and with support of the Blue Ribbon Task Force, during the next phase, we're moving into design, development, and implementation of the regional system, which I'll explain further on in this presentation. The centerpiece of regional mapping is a standardized suite of maps that provides location and context-specific information for wherever travelers are in their journey. This ensures that a rider has the information they need when they start a trip in the North Bay and get off in the city, and that they have a consistent experience, especially when they are transferring. There are many related opportunity areas beyond static signage that would benefit from this work. The project would provide wayfinding design standards for cities that are interested in extending the program beyond transit environments. Digital design standards will enable apps, kiosks, and real-time displays to be consistent with the regional program. The standard will also be extended to ticketing and payment services, mobility hubs, onboard vehicle information, and data sharing with third parties who may also adopt the standards in their own systems. The regional transit brand concept can be approached in any number of ways, all of which would be explored further in the next phase, but we've developed a few visuals to help illustrate the potential harmonization of transit services. Here you'll see examples of a conceptual Bay brand application. On the left, it's using a more local approach, with the Muni brand being endorsed by the regional brand, versus a more regional approach on the right, where the Bay brand is more prominent and serving as a regional network brand, where it is elevated over individual transit provider brands. This makes it appear as a single harmonized regional operation. However, a regional network brand like this assumes that broader network changes, including service and fare integration, are necessary to be successful. We've also looked at how the branding may be differentiated by county or by subregion. Again, these are just concepts for right now, and they'll be further explored in the next phase with both riders and stakeholders. The first step of the implementation phase will be a collaborative design process with MTC, regional transit partners, and cities to ensure that the standards serve the needs of and accurately represent the region, its localities, and its transit systems. This also includes development of a common graphic identity or brand with the option for full eventual full brand integration. Another key building block is a regional mapping services platform to streamline and standardize map production. Regional rollout would begin with sub-regional pilots in Sonoma, Solano, and Eastern Contra Costa and Alameda counties. We've already begun early planning with agencies in these counties. Through a collaborative design process with sub-regional and regional stakeholders, the project will develop sub-regional standards for the pilot sites within the context of the broader regional standards. Pilots will equip transit hubs, bus shelters, and stops with new wayfinding maps and a graphic identity, and new infrastructure in some locations. Excuse me. Both the regional standards design process and sub-regional pilot implementation will include multiple opportunities for testing and user feedback to ensure that the final standards deliver accessible and equitable access to transit information. Prototype testing and sub-regional pilots will also inform business case updates, specifically the benefits and costs associated with the region-wide program. Implementation planning, including phasing, governance, and operations and maintenance protocols, will also guide long-term regional rollout. The project is expected to be phased over the next several years, beginning with development of system design standards in 2022, in parallel with the planning and design of a prototype hub. Building on lessons learned from the prototyping, we would move forward with sub-regional pilots in 2023 before Bay Area-wide rollout. Planning, design, and evaluation at each stage will enable MTC to apply lessons learned in earlier phases to shape and de-risk wider deployment in 2026 and onward. So in terms of our next steps, MTC has released an RFP for standards design, prototype testing, and sub-regional pilot implementation. We expect to award a contract and kick off the project this summer. And as discussed, we expect there to be multiple opportunities for stakeholder engagement throughout the process. So we look forward to sharing updates with all of you in the future and hearing from all of you. With that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Shauna. And I think Director Miller is the first one with her hand up. Kate, take it away.
Sure, Shauna, thank you for coming and presenting this. And I neglected to really give you an intro on the efforts that you and your team are doing in this area. This is one of the projects that have been going forward as part of the region's operators wanting to improve the connectivity, both for riders in particular, but it is one of the projects that we sort of touted to the Blue Ribbon Task Force that there is an effort underway, and MTC staff is clearly carrying the water on this. The one question that I did have, Shauna, and I don't know if you're a visionary, but and you may not have an answer. Do you envision at any point that this effort is going to turn into maybe a single app that people can put on their phones to navigate around the Bay Area and have a one system app versus having 28 individual apps, or using Google as just sort of a general app?
It's an excellent question. Thank you. And my history at MTC is actually from the 511 program. So I worked in the trip planning and traveler information side of MTC for a very long time, and kind of watched the evolution of traveler information, where we built a number of kind of proprietary in-house trip planning. And then eventually, with apps and Google Maps, we saw the public really start to shift to those. So, from that 511 perspective, they've shifted away. At the same time, there is this awareness that agencies are still, doing their own thing throughout the region. What I would say on this, we're asking the consultant team to help us be visionary here and really consider, that's really the inclusion of the digital design standards. So while, within the scope of this, of the core project, we're not building a new trip planner. It's really about the design and standardization. But we are asking for, the digital standards and the vision for how those digital standards might be applied. So, I don't think there is a hard yes, we will be doing that. But there is the vision toward making sure that, this is a project that is going to take many, many years, just for the design and sub-regional. And as we talk about regional, there's a long runway ahead of us. So I do expect us to be visionary in that digital world.
Thank you for that. I know how challenging it is. It's very complex. And I think when you're using apps on your telephone, that you sort of dismiss the complexities involved in creating it. We're right now trying to integrate into one app our fixed route service and our on-demand services. And I'm not sure how much progress we're making, but we are working towards that. And so, the idea of pulling together 28 systems and their multiple modes, I can see is going to be a challenge, but I encourage us to move in that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And I agree that there's such opportunities. Just, are we willing to be bold? And I think from the commissioner's standpoint, from the operators, I think everyone's willing to get uncomfortable because the outcomes we're trying to achieve is, increased ridership in public transit. And that's why we're taking these initiatives on. So again, Shauna, thank you for all your work and commitment to this. Directors, any other questions? I don't see any, and this was just an informational item. Shauna, thank you again for joining us today. Great presentation.
Thank you for having us.
All right, and I didn't notice any public comment or either on that item.
We do not.
All right, so let's proceed with our public hearing. This is found on page 12 to 17. This is a public hearing in Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 grant application to the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans. This is a public hearing, so I'm officially going to open up the public hearing and then turn it over to Rebecca. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair Pedroza, members of the board. My name is Rebecca Schenk. I'm the program manager here at NVTA for Public Transit. And yes, we'll be speaking on item 9.1 today, which involves holding a public hearing and then approving resolution 22-04, which is attachment 1 in your packet, authorizing the executive director or designee to submit an FTA 5310 grant application to Caltrans seeking grant funding. And in this case, we're seeking funding to replace 6 of our Vingo ADA paratransit vehicles that have outlived their useful life, to replace them with new vehicles. And if successful, the grant through the 5310 program would provide NVTA with up to with up to $368,500 in new funding. And all 6 vehicles that we're looking to replace are beyond their 7-year useful life as medium-duty vehicles, and range in age from 2007 to 2012. So it's easy to meet the 7-year threshold. And then a fair number also have over 200,000 miles on them. So the alternatives besides the staff recommendation today would be for the board to approve kind of a reduced request that didn't require as much local match. So i.e. basically to reduce the number of vehicles we'd be asking for. And then the other option would be for the board to forgo submission to replace these 6 paratransit vehicles and maybe seek another funding source to replace the vehicles. This may result in not identifying funding and therefore not replacing the agency's vehicles up on their current schedule. So what NVTA goals does this align with? Really aligns with improving the system safety in order to support all modes and users, basically by replacing these paratransit vehicles with newer vehicles that are very efficient and will be easy to maintain. And so what was the process on this one? So Caltrans just basically on the first of the year did a notice of funding availability, and NVTA presented this information at its January 6, 2022 Paratransit Coordinating Council meeting and sent email communications to local nonprofits and social service agencies with instructions on how to file an application directly with Caltrans. Because in addition to NVTA being eligible as a public agency, the local nonprofits and social service agencies are also available or can apply for 5310 funds. And so as part of that process is what you're seeing today, where the NVTA board holds a public hearing to allow NVTA to submit the 5310 application and to make that request public so that others in the county and in the region are aware of our application. NVTA is aware that Calabria Care in Napa County will also be applying, and that's not really a conflict in that we will be applying for VineGo vehicles to service throughout Napa County and to meet the needs of our VineGo riders, and they'd be applying for vehicles for people that would be traveling specifically to the programs that Calabria Care offers. And we've been in communication with them about their application and sharing stories about having to submit through the particular electronic systems, et cetera. So we're definitely in cooperation there. And then after today, the public has 30 days to comment on NVTA's grant submission. So next steps would be if this action is approved today, NVTA would submit that application to Caltrans no later than March 2nd, and then we'd wait. And so to recap, we're asking you today to approve Resolution 22-04, Attachment 1, authorizing the Executive Director or designee to submit an FTA 5310 grant application to Caltrans for grant funding. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. At this point, directors, do we have any questions for staff? Rebecca, I don't see any at the moment. Laura, do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
All right, seeing no questions, I'll turn it back to Rebecca. Is the requested action to approve Resolution 22-04? I believe that's correct. So directors, at this point, if there's no further public comment, I'll entertain a motion.
Dunbar, so moved.
First by Dunbar, second by Joseph. Roll call vote, please.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Chris Canning,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Belia Ramos,
Yes.
Paul Doring,
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
Yes.
and John Dunbar.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, directors. Let's move on to our consent. We have a few items on our consent. Directors, any questions on our consent calendar? I don't see. I do. Director Dunbar, you have a question on our consent calendar?
Just for the record, I'll be abstaining on the vote for the minutes. I was absent at that meeting.
Okay, well, Would you like to take two separate motions, Director, so you can vote on the other items?
I was trying to avoid that by bringing that up, but if necessary, I can move after you have public comment. I'll move all
Yeah.
other items.
Okay. So let's see. I don't see any other directors with any questions. Laura, do we have any members of the public that have questions on our consent calendar?
We do not.
All right. Unless council tells me there's another way to do this, I'm going to look for a motion to move 10.1.
Yeah, Chair, this is Deanne Gillick. You can do one motion with the comment that Director Dunbar is abstaining from the one.
All right, council, I appreciate
to allow for one roll call.
All right, I appreciate that clarification, council. So at this point, I will entertain a motion for the consent calendar with the noted comment from Director Dunbar on 10.1.
So moved, Garcia.
We have first by Garcia,
Second by Joseph.
second by Joseph. Roll call vote, please.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Chris Canning,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Belia Ramos,
Yes.
Paul Doring,
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
Yes.
and John Dunbar.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, directors. Let's move on to 11.1, quarterly project updates. I believe this is just an informational item, and I'll turn it over to staff.
Yes. Good afternoon. Can you see my screen? Let me put it in.
Yes,
We can.
Okay.
Looks perfect.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. Danielle Schmitz, Director of Planning and Capital Development. Going to provide a project update today, as Kate mentioned, on a lot of our projects that are underway. Again, there's 4 of us, so between Alberto, Esqueda, Rebecca, Shank, Kate, and I, we are all working as co-project managers and kind of tag teaming a lot of these. So if you have questions at the end, either I can answer them or I'll pass it on to one of my colleagues. So to start off on a good note, Sosco Junction came back, as Kate mentioned. We went out to bid in December of last year after NVTA led the design phase of the project. We got the project to 100% design in a large part to Sanjay Mishra, who was our engineer who now left. But we went out to bid with in coordination with Caltrans, obviously, and the bids came back very favorable. They came back at the low bid was 37.7 million, which the engineer's estimate for this project was 42 million. So pending no protest, we should be able to award contract in March, and then the contract would be officially approved as of April 1st. And we would be able to have, the contractor would be able to do the staging. The current low bid contractor is Gelati Gelati Construction. As you may recall, they did half of the Jameson Canyon project. They did the Solano side. So Gelati Construction Company is the low bidder for this project, and pending no protest, we should be able to break ground late April, early May. And again, this project being quite large is over 2 construction seasons. So we're looking at an October 2024 open date for this project. Concurrently, the County of Napa, if you can see my mouse moving in the top left corner of the picture here, is working on the Sosco Ferry Devlin Road intersection project. They are also at 100% design with this project and have submitted it to Caltrans for review. I've been told that they are working on some utility work and right-of-way items, and they should be able to go out to bid with this project later this year, maybe fall 2022 timeframe. So that will be good for both of these projects moving forward. The budget again for Sosco Junction, as mentioned, the bids came in quite significantly below budget. So we should have plenty of contingency room with our project. And if there's any remaining STIP funding left over, we will advocate for it to go back into our county share. That would probably not happen until the latter years of our STIP cycle, but we will be working with MTC and CTC on that action. The other project that came in, the bids came in early February, was the Vine Trail Class 1 path from St. Helena to Calistoga. We've been working on this project also through design for the last few years. Rebecca has done a lot of work on this project, as well as Sanjay and Farhad, who was a interim engineer we had. There was a slight discrepancy when we opened the bids on February 3rd. The low bidder was perceived to be Gelati Construction, again at 12.5 million. But then after staff did, the back end, reviewed all the bids and the line items and triple checked the math, it looked like there was a computing error on Mercer, or on the Mercer Fraser side, not on staff side, as far as the bid cost. And so the low bidder is now perceived to be Mercer Fraser at $11.8 million. Again, as Kate mentioned, the three lowest bidders were very competitive. We're following our protocols in a public process, providing them all the bidding information for the three lowest bidders. They will come back by Friday, 5 p.m. and let us know if they will honor this low bid at 11.8 million, or they will withdraw their bid due to calculation error, computing error. Some good news with this project is we did receive our encroachment permit with Caltrans. We are working on a county flood control permit. I believe Rebecca will be bringing an item to the board next month on a draft no rise permit. And we are continuing to work with the partners on the budget shortfall, which is on the slide in front of you. Because of some environmental and cultural mitigation costs that were not included in the budget previously in the engineer's estimate, we're looking about a 1.3 million construction support costs budget shortfall. And then just because the bids all came back over the engineer's estimate, that's that $2 million over estimate shortfall that you see. So we're looking around as mentioned, $3.5 million shortfall for this project. And we are looking at ways to cut costs as well as ways to secure additional funding to get the project under contract and underway. The bus maintenance facility. So in late last year, we were able to secure all the funding with the hard work of Tony and his finance staff. We were able to secure the TIFIA loan in November, and the project started construction in January. The grading and earthwork is about 50% complete, or a little bit over 50% complete. The one great thing for the projects and the construction, but not so much for California's drought, is that we have had really good, fortunate weather for these projects moving ahead of schedule. It's been dry. The wind actually helped dry out some of the soil for compaction purposes. And so we are ahead of schedule on Imola Park and Ride, as mentioned before, and making really good headway with this schedule as well. We invite everyone to the groundbreaking ceremony this Friday, Sheehy Court, 10 a.m. And here's a picture of Valerie, our communications officer, went out there a couple weeks ago and took a picture of some of the work that's happening out there. And then Imola Park and Ride, I believe Chair or Member Dunbar was asking about the work on Imola Park and Ride. There is a lot of work going on out there. As you can see, they're moving a lot of earth. The groundwork is over 80% complete. They're building the bus ramps. As you see here, this is a bus off ramp on SR 29, the southbound or the northbound off ramp. They're grading this. You'll see under the underpass, parallel to Imola, they're doing the sidewalk construction currently. And there were a couple little hiccups, I think, with the traffic control because they put all the K-rail out there, but Alberto got some variable messaging signs, which has seemed to tempered the traffic issues. Again, moving full steam ahead. This project is probably set to be complete late spring, early summer, if we continue to have favorable weather. And then the Vine Transit System would be serving this project in late summer, early fall. Again, this is a picture of some of the work that's happening out there. This would be the southbound on-ramp on SR 29. This is where the bus would pull out, and we would have a passenger loading and alighting facility here. And again, the project is moving well ahead of schedule. Another project we are currently working on is the State Route 29 American Canyon Project Initiation Document, what we call the PID. This project is building off of the State Route 29 Comprehensive Multimodal Plan that was completed in 2020. But this PID document is really just looking at the segment of the highway between Napa Junction Road and American Canyon Road. So looking at operational multimodal improvements between the terminus of American Canyon Road and Napa Junction. And we have a draft PID document that's about 80% complete. There is an item later in the board agenda about potentially eliminating alternative 3 from the PID document to move it forward. We're hoping to have the draft PID document a second circulation to Caltrans in April, as well as a public meeting, and completed by May of this year to then move into the environmental phase of the project. So NVTA continues to be a part of the State Route 37 projects. Just to remind everybody at the meeting today, there's kind of 2 parallel projects happening right now. There's the interim project, which is on State Route 37 from Mare Island to Sears Point. And that project is really about alleviating the congestion and the bottleneck that happens there. It's what we call the interim project. And the big milestone that this project has crossed is that we released the draft environmental document for this project that just in January. And so the comment period is to the end of February. And then from there, we're looking to secure funding to do advanced planning. So go further into design, as well as Kate will probably mention later today in the legislative report that Senator Dodd did agree to run legislation for tolling on this project. The alternatives for this project are kind of either a 3-lane contraflow lane with a movable barrier or 4 lanes each way. And within the 4-lane option, there's like a various shoulder widths that are at play here. But those are kind of the 2 main alternatives, either 4 lanes open all the time, both ways, or a contraflow lane. The issue with the contraflow lane is that it's a very long span. It's about 9 miles, which is going to be high operation and maintenance cost of having that machine out there moving the barrier, twice a day. This project, we're in hopes to have this project fully funded and constructed in the next 5 years. That's why it's called the interim project. The cost range is about $300 to $400 million, depending on which alternative and the lane widths of the shoulders. And just to give you kind of a really good, I think, visual overview, if you look at this picture on the map right here, so this is Sears Point, this is segment B, everything in yellow between the colors is the segment for the interim project. The red here on both the eastern end and the western end of the project, that is the current delay that is being felt. I think right now it's 80-minute additional delay if you're headed from west to east in the PM, and it's about a 30 to 50-minute delay in the morning headed west, or headed from east to west. So that's what the red is. The blue represents alternatives 1 and 2, which is the contraflow lane alternative. So that is the congestion for that alternative. The green is what would a 4-lane open all the time would give you. So you can see that there's a significant congestion reduction with having that second lane open all the time. The second lane would be a high occupancy vehicle lane, toll lane. But again, I think this is just a good visual representation of the benefit. And then there's the ultimate project for Highway 37. This is a 15-year plus project, really looking at it, making it a causeway, elevating it. As you can imagine, the environmental, the right-of-way, the costs are all escalated, and it's in the billions of dollars kind of project. So there's going to be a mega effort to try to fund this ultimate project, but we are still working on the planning stages of it, working on the planning and environmental linkages, planning document for the ultimate project. And lastly, but not least, we are still working on the Napa Valley Ford SR29 Up Valley improvements. We were successful in getting money, $6 million from, or $8 million, excuse me, from MTC to work on operational and multimodal safety improvements at these 3 intersections. So looking at Rutherford Road, Oakville Crossroad, as well as Madison Street, and looking at what we can do to not only help move traffic better, but to provide safer crossings and safer navigation for all modes. We did hold a public workshop, I believe in September last year. We are in the infancy planning stages of this project, so no alternative has been completely taken off the table yet. But at that meeting, we talked about either traffic signal control or roundabouts. There was a lot of public favor for the roundabouts alternative. And so we are still working on the design, the preliminary design, and we hope to move into environmental later this year. And when we move into environmental, we will have another formal public outreach event. And we are working with MTC to secure additional funding. We will most likely go after federal and state discretionary funding this year for this project, as well as meeting with various property owners on the project that could impact some of their right-of-way. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much for a detailed report, great PowerPoint. It just underscores that we're doing a lot in Napa County. So thank you very much, Danielle. All right, directors, any questions? Director Dunbar and then Director Garcia.
Yeah, to follow up again on IMOLA, and I appreciate you mentioned the K-rails, and it was very tight yesterday, and it made me think about pedestrian and bicycle pathway through that intersection. Is that going to be a temporary problem? And if so, do we know for how long? Because it looked like there was barely room for vehicles while they were trenching all along that east-west lane. And also, I appreciate all the signs all the way down the exit ramp on 29. Still had a car turning left from the right lane because they just don't care. But I get people have a hard time sometimes changing their patterns, but could you maybe just speak to the timeline on that level of kind of the tight passage?
Yeah. Are you particularly talking about the IMOLA, the right of, I guess the room on IMOLA for bicycle and pedestrians?
Correct.
Yeah. Alberto, do you know the timing on that specific element as far as the sidewalk and bike lane that would go there and when they would be pouring the concrete for the curb and gutter?
Yes, the concrete end will be poured in the next few weeks. However, the conditions in the field do change from week to week, but currently we do anticipate that the concrete will be poured for the sidewalk in the next few weeks. We haven't received too many complaints, but we did add share the road signs for bikes and pedestrians. We did restripe some of the lanes to warn or alert drivers that they can't make that left turn from the outer lane on the southbound off-ramp that you mentioned. And we have installed as much signage as we can. We do anticipate that it'll be there, I'd say at least 4 more weeks at least. But it's like I said, conditions are varying from day to day in the field right now.
I appreciate that you're going to be monitoring that, because it does look like it could be challenging depending on how much pedestrian and bike traffic that tries to get through that intersection, because it's really unpassable on the south, east, west portion. But thank you.
Thank you, Director Dunbar. Director Garcia.
Yes, could you bring back the slide on the State Route 37 ultimate design?
Yes.
Really helpful. Thank you for the presentation, though. Very informative. Couple things from the sit on the State Route 37 Policy Committee, so I'm familiar with this area with it and all the challenges it presents. One data point, probably a few years old by now. It's 21 miles from Nevada to Vallejo. 5 p.m. queue time takes 1 hour and 40 minutes. That's currently set up. That's the urgency of this. If you look at these designs here, this is a way to integrate versus mitigate. There's a new catchphrase they're using in terms of environmental concern. Excuse me. This is the largest wetlands in the whole North San Francisco Bay Area that's left. So there's a great interest. Sorry. My allergies are kicking in. Give me a moment here. The way of doing it. Well,
you want us to come back to you, Garcia?
Sorry.
We'll come back
to
you.
Right. We'll come back later. Yep.
Okay. All right. Let's go to your colleague, and then maybe you can come back in a bit. All right. Director Joseph.
Yes. Well, let's stay on this screen, and I hope Mayor Garcia gets better quickly, and I'll try to be brief. There was some discussion about a roundabout at Skaggs Island Road and 37. Is that still in the mix, or is it just trying to make 4 lanes?
Not Skaggs, at the intersection at 121, so at Sears Point and 37. That could potentially be a roundabout. They haven't settled on a intersection improvement there. It could also be an elevated intersection with a flyover type deal. They're still working on the details of it.
Okay, because yeah, you're right. It was a Sears Point that.
Yeah, it's the 121-37 intersection. That would be included in the interim project, some sort of intersection improvement there, as well as at Mare Island.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hey, Director Garcia, are you back with us?
I'm back. Yes, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, to that point, there's been a number of proposals for improvement in those intersections areas there. That's part of the overall larger plan. You got a very excellent presentation, though, at North Bay Watershed Association on the environmental scope of the environmental planning for the area. And it's tremendous. This was quite an asset. By having a causeway, kind of like the Yellow Causeways example we use, this allows the water to the bay tides to move in and out of here. It also anticipates with sea level rise how much higher this has to be. One of the challenges is it's a very soft mud throughout the whole area. So this is deemed to be the least expensive way of being able to build an elevated highway. So it's moving forward, and great to see the improvements that are being come together. The started very large with a lot of input. Now it's kind of narrowed down to this. It looks like a more permanent design. There's also interest in retaining the rail line at some point. That may be viable. I know there's interest from the Sonoma side with their rail system to being able to connect, and you could connect Novato all the way to Sassoon in the Capital Corridor. So future, much farther future design interest. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Garcia. And I will say on the town hall that Senator Dodd had, he had Mr. Cummings, the new executive director, was smart, and it was again brought up about the connectivity of the Sonoma County all the way to Napa to Solano. Some of us have been on the existing rail that's there, right? There would have to be some improvements made, but definitely it's a question of not if, it's a question of when, right? In terms of bringing that rail over. And, what I will share is, I'm very excited about kind of these updates, Danielle, and what we're doing up Valley from a roundabout perspective in terms of flow idling, but the safety of those intersections is critical. And then some of the work we're doing in American Canyon to get some of those projects going. I do want to acknowledge the council members from American Canyon of also acknowledging that, you know, maybe the expansion of roadways wasn't the best alternative, but also bringing real alternatives to the table that we could advance. So I do, again, I want to acknowledge the elected officials from American Canyon for being a partner in that. And to me, our job as MTC, as your representative, is to try to bring those resources from the outside to make these projects happen. So we know the mission, we know the charge, but again, this is a regional body thinking regionally. So again, just want to acknowledge that. And lastly, I do want to give some credit to our executive director. She's been leading this effort as well, working with MTC and Caltrans, again, to get them on the same page. So we're all marching in the same direction. So Kate, thank you for your leadership as well. All right, directors, I don't see any other questions from anyone. Laura, do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
All right.
Oh, yes, we do. We just have a hand raised.
All right.
All right, Justin, I'm unmuting you now for public comment.
Yes, thank you, Laura. I had two things. I think I heard Kate something about the 511. So how I had to sign up, email or something. Is there a way I can get that to you, Kate?
Yeah, we'll look into that, Justin. You're just looking for information to be sent to you on transit updates or the tree updates. You said 511, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you have to go to their site, but let me research it and I'll email you or call you.
Okay. And the second one, I saw noticed that there's like when I walk down Day Hoplo, go do my work in Mola. Are you looking at Day Hoplo? What gonna do over there? Are you guys gonna put something new stuff in there, new sidewalk, or is that coming up?
Yeah, one of our priorities is to work with the county and the city to build a pathway right next to the state hospital so that it's safe for bikes and pedestrians. But we're still very much in the preliminary planning stages on that, Justin. So we'll keep you up to date.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you, Justin, for calling in, and Kate, thank you for that. Laura, I don't see any other members. So again, this concludes our quarterly project update. Again, really great presentation, Danielle. So let's move on to our regular agenda item, 12.1. This is a Vine Transit update. Rebecca will take it over. This is found on page 57 to 64.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chairman Pedroza, members of the board. Once again, my name is Rebecca Schenk. I am the transit manager here at the Napa Valley Transportation Authority. And today I'll be giving you an update on the second quarter fiscal year 21-22 operational summary, and also try to give you some update on some prior transit items that you've seen before. So one of those is a vehicle update. So if you remember, in October of 2021, the board authorized NVTA up to $450,000 for replacement for bus number 253, which had been totaled in an accident that was found, and the Vine was not at fault. And we were able to purchase, and new to us, a used Eldorado 40-foot national bus, and it arrived in late January. And after we kind of take it through a series of tests and make sure all of the different systems are integrated from the fare box to the head sign, et cetera, it looks like it'll be on the road next week, and it'll become bus number 259. You can see it there. The total invoice for that came in $390,000 around, so just kind of under the total allocated amount. And then we did end up finding out since then that bus number 253, which had been totaled, our settlement cash value for that was $162,500. So this bus ended up costing us in kind of net terms $227,987. So we're excited to have this new to us bus on the road and as part of our fleet. So also On the fleet side of things, a vehicle update on our new electric buses. So you'll see the Butterfly there is one of the 5 BYD buses will be arriving. So the St. Helena is going to end up with the Butterfly, and we're working with your chamber kind of on branding, but it's got to be an improvement over the current white vehicle with a phone number. So I think we've got some room for improvement there. So we'll be looking to market that in St. Helena, and then the Yountville vehicle, which will have a B, will also, it looks like, be here in March. We have a third party that had done a final, what we thought was the final inspection on the bus last week, but there are a few tweaks that we still need to make related to head signs, radios, and bus speed. Our parameter was the bus go 55. It's going 54 right now. So they were doing a couple engine upgrades, but we will have those buses in mid-March, and we're working through the installation both in St. Helena and in Yountville. And in St. Helena and in Yountville, at your respective councils, you'll see agreements, updated agreements coming to you in March to reflect the new fuel type. For example, in Yountville, right, we had prior with the trolley had used your fuel source there on site, and we would reimburse you for the diesel cost, and now we'll be reimbursing you instead for the electric cost. So there'll be some changes in that agreement that will be coming to your respective council. And we've also been doing a lot of work with the Center for Transportation and the Environment, because we're basically going from maybe relying on someone like Napa Valley Petroleum, right, to be the fuel provider, to us being more active in terms of being the fuel provider. And so we've been doing a lot of modeling on all of the different routes we've been running the buses. Here you'll see St. Helena and Yountville on demand services. We're going to be controlling when we are charging, really kind of gearing up towards these super off-peak and off-peak times, avoiding that 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. time for charging, and really focusing on overnight charging, and then during driver lunch breaks, trying to get a 30-minute charge in place there. So we think that these vehicles will be able, with all of our modeling and such, be able to run the full day in both of these jurisdictions, charge overnight with one 30-minute charge during the day. Other updates, our CAD-AVL system. So if you remember, in March of 2021, the NVTA board approved an agreement with the GMV Synchromatics to update the CAD-AVL system. We had a prior system from Avail, and we were at the end of the 7-year contract period there. So we completed the installation of the new CAD-AVL system. We're working through some final punch list items at the moment. GMV is actually out at the yard today. And now our real-time information will be available on what's called Transit app. It's kind of the green moniker here in the upper, I guess, left-hand corner to you. And that will be our real-time app provider. Some of you might already have that because it's more of a universal app where many transit systems throughout the US are available on it. One of the nice things too there, though, in addition to being pretty universal, is that you do have the options for payment and buying Vine passes through in the back end of its system, either using your credit card, the App Store, Google Play, and then it all comes in under a payment app that we already have, Hop Through. So that doesn't cause any problems around our accounting side. We do expect now with Transit app for more purchases to be occurring through the app, as opposed to maybe off of our website, we would mail you something, or on the other end, if you would physically come here and buy something at the customer service office. And then just to give you kind of the overview of the last quarter, and the second quarter of fiscal year 21-22 is from October through December. And this is looking at the local service, particularly within the city of Napa. I mean, it does show a fairly rosy picture here, right, when you compare both to the previous quarter, where we operated a hybrid of on-demand and fixed route, and then back 1 year where we were strictly on demand, right? But what you're not seeing is where we had been at prior to the pandemic. So continuing an uptick here in the city of Napa, but still well below the passengers per revenue hour, which 8 passengers per hour, which had been our prior goal. We are just above 4, or between 4 and 5. And then in terms of the regional service, that's our routes 10 and 11, 11X, 21, and 29. Same story, right? 12 passengers per hour had been our prior goal. And in this quarter, we remain well below that, but with our 10 and 11 performing the best of this group. And then in terms of our shuttles, in Calistoga, St. Helena, Yountville, and American Canyon, we have definitely seen uptakes and relatively strong performance in Calistoga and American Canyon, just 1 passenger per revenue hour below our 4-person passenger per revenue hour goal. And then St. Helena and Yountville still remain relatively low. In the case of Yountville, until the point where we're able to go up to the Yountville Veterans Home and service that campus, I think that number will remain low. And then in terms of the total ridership change, right? We've, like I said, we have to go way back, right? Now to a kind of prior to COVID. So here I'm doing prior quarter, prior year, and then 2 years prior, 2 years prior being in the gold. And so, right, what you can see is in stark contrast to where we had been at prior to the pandemic. In terms of the Route 10 and 11, they are performing lower than the prior quarter. But when you look at it, it really did play out in the month of December when Omicron kind of started to peak. And so I would expect the Route 10 and 11 more to level off in this coming quarter. And then in terms of the ridership on VineGo as well, and the same as on the prior slide where I'm showing the prior quarter, prior year, and then 2 years prior, VineGo has kind of suffered the most on this front, which you would expect given who we are serving. But we are expecting, for example, we've gotten word from Calabria Care that they'll be using our VineGo services again come April 1st. And we've have a lot of new people who will be visiting that facility, for example, that have signed up for our services once again. So I expect the VineGo number at the very least to increase there. And finally, just to give you a little update, we had instituted a temporary service reduction that's ongoing now and is set to end next weekend with a return to service, regular service next week. And we are going to make that change, which would mean once again, we would have regular weekday service on the Route 10. We would have Sunday service again on the Yountville trolley. We would have the 11X back, and we'd be doing the 2 trips that we are currently not doing on the Route 29. So that would be definitely good from a rider perspective, especially on the Route 10. That's where we definitely had the most impact to doing this temporary service reduction. But I do still think it was the right call because it allowed our missed trips to be scheduled in a way as opposed to sporadic, and that we did continue to see throughout the end of January and the beginning of February, a high number of COVID cases and COVID exposures among our drivers. So that temporary break was definitely necessary. And with that, I'll answer questions. Sorry, Mayor Dunbar, I know your hand's been up for quite some time.
All right, thank you very much, Rebecca. Mayor Dunbar has been patiently waiting, so take it away.
Three questions.
Yeah.
2 related to the trolley in Yountville, and the third I'll start with, which is with the change in indoor mask wearing mandate, the lifting of the statewide mandate. It is still required for public transit ridership, and I'm bringing it up just to remind folks, but also if there is any kind of messaging that we are doing to remind people that they still must wear masks, even though the statewide mandate has been lifted. That's question 1. And before I forget my other 2, the length of the new EV bus that is replacing the trolley in Yountville, it looks like it's longer, and I don't know that it is. I just know that there are certain areas in town that were already challenged by the trolley trying to turn around or get in certain neighborhoods. So I wondered if you've analyzed that. Maybe it's the same, maybe not. Then also, how are you distinguishing the trolley from the other transit vehicles?
Sure. Oh, so sure. Okay. So I guess two things. So on the first question, yes, we ran into this problem related to masks back in June 15th of last year. If you remember, we were in a similar situation where transit under the TSA was still required to wear masks, but you were not required to wear indoor masks in California. So at that point, we did put signs on our buses, right, to remind people that masks were still required on transit vehicles. And we're going to continue to kind of go with that set of signs. I know Valerie, who's our new communications officer, and myself were just talking about this earlier in the week. And last week, she was like, oh, should we, commit to March 18th, which is when TSA says they're going to end theirs? And I was like, no. We don't want to put that, I guess, at any point, because we know that that has the option to extend. We had all geared up last June for it to be an issue, but I think people are pretty well aware in terms of our regular riders that we are kind of subject to another set of rules, but we are putting out additional social media. We're going through our buses to make sure all of our buses still have that messaging, etc. So we're hoping that it won't be too much of a problem on that front. And then in terms of the Yountville trolley, and what that looks like in terms of the physical length. So it does look long, not going to lie, but the vehicle there, it's 30 feet long, the BYD vehicle, and the current trolleys in Yountville, both 403 and 404, are about 28 feet in length, give or take. So we are about pretty much the exact same size, and the turning radius on these is a little better. So I think we will be all right. We've talked about this with Calistoga, for example, where they're operating a 22-foot vehicle. We didn't think we could sub in the 30-foot vehicle in that place. But in this case, with the 28 feet to the 30 feet, we think we're going to be, or we pretty much know we're going to be just fine from our modeling. I'm not going to say there won't be one turn somewhere. We might find it, right, in reality, but I think that we will be all right moving forward.
And then just the distinction between the other transit vehicles, the trolley we've had is so distinctly and uniquely different, but these are not necessarily.
Right. And you will have, pretty much on a day-to-day basis, not saying there won't ever be a sub out, but you are going to have a bee is going to be the theme in Yountville, and then St. Helena having the butterfly. We are looking at updating the maps that we have, for example, that designate the service, and trying to build off that kind of that bee theme and that colorations, the colors that we have, etc. So we will need to do, and we'll have to work with the chamber and do advertising at the Veterans Home to know that, so people know that this is the replacement.
Good. It sounds like you have a good plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Dunbar. Rebecca, thank you for clarifying. Directors, any other comments, questions? Director Doring, go ahead.
Just want to comment that the last two slide decks have been exceptional. The presentations that went with them are exceptional. And could you share those with me, my email? That would be great. Sure. Thank you.
All right, thank you for those comments, Director Doring. I don't see any other directors with questions. Laura, do we have any members of the public that wish to provide any questions on 12.1?
We do. Just one moment while I unmute. Go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, Laura. So Becca, so we're going to get a new schedule.
So you won't get a new schedule. We had temporarily gone to running like the Saturday schedule on the Route 10. So we're just going to go back to doing the November 21st schedule. Will be in full effect once again. So there'll be no new schedule.
Okay, it's going to be, when this whole thing over May, we will get new schedule.
Yeah, assuming that this whole thing is over and that there are no variations. I'm not going to make you any promises because I can't control COVID. But yes, if COVID has ceased to be such an issue, we would have a new schedule basically at the end of the school year.
Thank you, Becca, so much.
We're all hoping what Justin is thinking. So
yeah.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions, comments on 12.1. That was just a update. Rebecca, thank you very much. So let's move on. 12.2, this is Napa Valley Forward Award of Right-of-Way Acquisition Services Agreement. This is found on page 65 to 88. Alberto, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Alberto Esqueda, and I'm presenting item 12.2. As Chair Pedrosa mentioned, it's Napa Valley Forward, the award of right-of-way acquisition service agreement. I am requesting that the board authorize the executive director to enter into an agreement with OPC for the right-of-way acquisition services in an amount not to exceed $150,000. NVTA partnered with MTC to make improvements along a portion of SR 29, as Danielle mentioned. This project has been dubbed Napa Valley Forward. And the purpose of this project is to make multimodal improvements along SR 29 at 3 key up valley intersections. So at SR 29 in Madison Street in Yountville, SR 29 in Oakville Crossroad, and SR 29 and Rutherford Road, which is also SR 128, a state highway or state route. The intersection improvements would improve traffic operations. They would slow down traffic and allow crossroad traffic to safely make turns onto SR 29 while also improving bike and ped movements. The improvements at Oakville Crossroad and Rutherford Road would also reduce speed and enhance safety for all operators. Currently, the high speeds and unprotected turns at these intersections are dangerous for bikes and pedestrians. So the project would address safety by introducing improvements that reduce car speeds and also just provide safer crossings for everyone, whether it's a roundabout or a traffic signal. As Danielle mentioned, we haven't arrived at a final design. So there are various alternatives for this project. The project would reduce wait times for vehicles turning in and out of the crossroads. I think that's one of the major improvements, as well as allowing peds and bikes to move safely through the intersections. The Napa Valley Forward project has already been awarded $6 million under MTC's Safe and Seamless Mobility Quick Strike program. This is in addition to another $2 million in MTC capital funds. And with this money, MTC hired GHD to complete the project preliminary engineering and environmental phases. But because NVTA staff is more familiar with the project location and the community, NVTA took the lead on right away. And excuse me, this contract would supplement MTC's consultant team. So MTC has some right-of-way scope within their contract with GHD, but this right-of-way agent would assist MTC with the parcel appraisal, negotiations, and acquisitions if needed. NVTA released an RFP back in November of 2021 and received 2 bids. Overland Pacific Cutler, OPC, provided the lowest responsible bid. And the anticipated fiscal impact is of $150,000. However, NVTA has entered into an agreement with MTC in the amount of $150,000 as well. So that will cover the cost of the contract. I believe the contract in the agenda attachment has an erroneous amount of roughly $234,000. And the contract's scope has now been modified to meet NVTA's $150,000 budget. There are alternatives to the recommendation, and the alternative is for the board to not award OPC a contract to provide the right-of-way service for the Napa Valley Forward project, but this would result in a project delay and potentially compromise the quick funding or the quick strike funding. But with this, I conclude my report, and I'm open for questions if you have any.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And again, I just want to acknowledge support we've received from MTC, again, to bring outside money to continue to have this conversation. I will share, I don't think lighted intersections are going to be a possibility there. This is really looking at roundabouts as the option. And just for some additional perspective, we have been meeting with potentially impacted property owners, having discussions around impacted private property. We've also been working with members from the Napa Valley Vintners Association around the benefits of these improvements. And we've received some positive feedback so far. But again, this is just a continuation of exploring these improvements. So at this point, I'll see if there's any questions from directors. Director Joseph.
Yes, at the Madison and 29 intersection, since it's already signalized, are we looking at the possibility of unsignalizing it, turning it into a roundabout, or other types of improvements?
That is a possibility. There is great backup that occurs there northbound in the morning hours, as well as backup that occurs on the north end when traffic or the commute is going southbound. So if we do provide improvements at Oakville and Rutherford, this third intersection at Madison would need to work in conjunction with the other two so that it flows continuously. And removing the signal is one of the alternatives, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Director Joseph. All right, any other questions from any directors? I don't see any. Do we have any members of the public that wish to make public comment on this item?
We have a chat submitted by a member of the public.
Okay. And that just gets recorded into the record, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Laura. And again, I will just say, again, really appreciate, what MTC's investing in the community now, Miller, for taking the lead. Her and I have been talking to stakeholders in the community. And again, really wanting to look at how can we improve those intersections, and again, trying to bring outside resources. So I believe this is an action item, so I would entertain a motion for approval.
So moved.
All right. We have first by Joseph.
Second.
Second by
Chris can have it.
All right. Second by Cannon. Roll call
Thanks,
vote,
Jeff.
please.
Dan Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Chris Canning,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Belia Ramos,
Yes.
Paul Doring,
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
Yes.
John Dunbar.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you, directors. Let's move on, and thank you, Alberto. Let's move on. 12.3, this is State Route 29 multimodal improvements through American Canyon Alternative 3. This is found on page 89 to 94. Danielle, take it away.
Yes, Danielle Schmitz again, here to present item 12.3, a request for the NVTA board to formally eliminate alternative 3, which is the 6-lane alternative, and a pedestrian underpass from the State Route 29 project initiation document through American Canyon. NVTA has been a longtime partner with American Canyon and Caltrans on finding solutions to improve operations and multimodal access along the highway in American Canyon. In 2012, we did complete a gateway study, and it introduced an option of potentially widening the highway to 6 lanes. Since that time, there has been a number of policy and regulatory considerations about capacity increasing projects, particularly projects that induce vehicle miles traveled, what we call VMT. And most recently, the newly adopted state climate action plan for transportation infrastructure, what we call CAPDI, its intended guidance is to move transportation investments away from these types of projects and to reduce climate impacts, particularly caused by automobiles. There are a number of reasons that staff is looking to eliminate alternative 3 now before the PID document is finalized. And it is to accelerate the project and to minimize costs. So alternative 3 is the most expensive of the 3 alternatives due to the right-of-way costs as well as the environmental costs of having to do a complete full environmental impact report on alternative 3. This would be a short-term kind of traffic fix as far as providing additional general purpose lane, but high cost, low return on investment. Alternatives 1 and 2. So 1 is the transit and multimodal improvements, and 2 is the roundabouts, would require a less intense and costly environmental process, while alternative 3 would be a full-blown EIR, as mentioned before, and could cost an additional $1 million in environmental work to the project. Additionally, as outlined in the letter received from Caltrans on December 21st, 2021, Caltrans is not likely to support any alternative that would widen the highway through American Canyon. They have stated this, and I believe the letter is attached to the board report. In addition, the pedestrian underpass would also cost additional money, and we feel that with alternatives 1 and 2, we are providing enhanced at-grade pedestrian crossings. We'll have many of them, and so this would mitigate, I guess, or this would provide pedestrian safe crossage at a lower cost, with a pedestrian underpass only being able to being constructed a little bit north or right next to Napa Junction Road. We would only have 1, and it'd be quite costly. So we would rather have enhanced pedestrian crossings multiple places along the corridor. So for those kind of 2 main reasons, the VMT, or 3 main reasons, the VMT and the included cost or increased cost, and Caltrans' reluctance to support any alternative that would widen the highway, staff is asking the board to eliminate alternative 3 from the project initiation document before we circulate it for final approval to Caltrans and the public. The alternative to this request would be the board could decide to carry alternative 3 through the PID and into the environmental process, and that would potentially, or it will increase the cost of the environmental process. The strategic goals met by this proposal are to serve the transportation needs of the entire community and to minimize the energy and other resources required to move people and goods. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you have about the request before the board today.
Thank you, Danielle. Let's go with Director Garcia and then Director Joseph.
Director Joseph's hands up first, so I'll defer to him, see what he wants.
Director Joseph and then Director Garcia.
Okay, well, thank you. And it's more of a comment than a question or anything. And as you all know, the city of American Canyon has advocated for 6 lanes for probably 10 years now. And from my perspective, and Director Garcia can comment, and I think our city manager's here as well. I think from my perspective, the time has come to acknowledge that that's an uphill fight that's not worth fighting for. And I certainly support what's being proposed tonight. A little bummed out on the grade separated pedestrian crossing, but I think there's some ways of getting across the highway. And the other point I really want to emphasize is what never seems to get a lot of airplay. And what we are getting out of this is bike lanes, class 1 bike lanes on both sides. We're getting undergrounding of power lines. We're getting sidewalks, probably getting an aesthetic boost that will be beneficial to the community more in terms of economics as well as aesthetics. And therefore, what we really will end up with is a safer method of getting from point A to point B. We will certainly slow down the traffic, but keep it moving. And so, from my perspective, I think how this has evolved over the time is very good. The other half of this that isn't today's discussion is what I think we're calling it the Napa County Mobility Solution, or Gateway Mobility, some kind of a mobility solution that really focuses on also extending the Newell parallel road all the way to South Kelly. And that, I think, when you combine the corridor improvements with that Newell extension, you get a very effective mobility solution that will improve traffic flow, safety, and deal with emergencies and accidents that invariably happen. So I just wanted everybody to know I'm on board and we'll support it as staff is proposing.
Thank you, Director Joseph. Director Garcia.
Yes, thank you. Director Joseph and I just share a lot of common interests with this project. Give you a perspective from frustrations in American Canyon and all places north that the commuter goes to and comes home from every day. It's congested, and 6 lanes was a proposal. Well, I think we have an alternative, and that would be the mobility corridor, we're calling it, South County. This Newell Drive extension to South Kelly. That's not in this document or part of this conversation today, but it should be. And at some point, it'll come forward. I got everything's blooming today. I got allergies. See, my plan along was, why do we want that 3rd lane? More capacity. Well, that's engineer talk. What commuter wants is drive time. How long does it take me to drive from point A to point B? How long does it take me to drive through American Canyon? Sometimes it would take up to 45 minutes just get up to the airport because of the congestion, because of a lack of an alternate route. Well, my conversation coming into, if I want to let go of this 3rd lane, and for the interest in the constituents I serve in American Canyon, and Director Joseph serves in American Canyon, and the constituents in all the jurisdictions north of us, the commuters, the congestion has had a major impact, not only on quality of life, but economy. North County, we've heard it before. I can't get workers. Why? Well, the cost of living is too high. We understand that. Commute times give me taking an hour and a half each direction out of my life just to get to my job. So I'm checking an alternate route, an alternate job location. So my point in saying all this, if Newell Drive to South Kelly is equal to or better than the 3rd lane in American Canyon, then we have met our goal. And all the amenities that Director Joseph talked about, that can come to play. We'll have a more community-oriented through lane through American Canyon. We spruced up a lot. I mean, folks go through American Canyon. Where is it? Well, you just drove through it because there's nothing there that really connotes it. Safer for pedestrians. It's harder for me to imagine what could be worse than just leaving it the way it is, because you can't even safely walk along the street. There's no pedestrian, there's no bike lane. That would be major improvements. But for the voices in American Canyon that says, yeah, you have promised us this 3rd lane for years and years, and now you're going to take it away. Look, we have an alternate, and it's about drive time. If you start talking about drive time instead of capacity, capacity means a lot to managers and engineers and people who design this stuff. Drive time matters to the commuter. How long does it take me to get through American Canyon? How long does it take me to get to north end of the valley? That's the message sent forward. So in saying all that, I would say, I can give up the 3rd lane approach if we can get support on Newell Drive to South Kelly, because that will be an equal. There's also the other side of it that probably doesn't relate to this board right now, but safety. How are you going to get fire apparatus north of American Canyon in commute hour? How are you going to get emergency equipment up that way? Napa North has 2 parallel roads, Silverado and 29, all the way up to Calistoga. You get north of American Canyon, there's one road right now, goes all the way to Napa. So the Newell extension to South Kelly not only improves capacity, drive time, it also improves safety response. And that's why I support it. So I'm asking you to come forward at some point for all of us. And I think it's in our best interest if we all support that extension to Newell to South Kelly. And with that being said, I can support the action we'll take today.
Thank you, Director Garcia. I don't see any other directors with questions. Laura, do we have any members of the public that wish to make any public comment?
We do not.
All right, and again, I'll just acknowledge, we have been working with American Canyon. Mayor Garcia mentioned other projects, not beyond NVTA. It requires other municipalities working together on it. There's been some general conversations on, but again, I do appreciate the acknowledgement of where the state is going, of not expanding highways, but looking at how do we create real outcomes for the benefit of those that are using our systems to what I think Director Joseph and Director Garcia acknowledged. So I think this is a step in the right direction. But before we entertain a motion, I see Director Dunbar, and then we'll close.
Mr. Holly's on the line also as well.
Yeah. So as soon as we finish with directors, Director Garcia, we will give City Manager.
Thank you.
Director Dunbar.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually going to try to encourage and invite either Director Garcia or Joseph to make the motion in second, but apparently the city manager has something to say first.
Okay, so City Manager Holly, do you have some words?
Oh, yeah, just real quick. I just wanted to thank Chair Pedroza, Executive Officer Miller. We look forward to finalizing the PID document with Caltrans and the next step on the CEQA process. Thanks to everyone involved. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jason, for coming on. All right, at this point, we'll entertain a motion.
I move to move for the document.
I'll second.
Yeah.
All right.
Remove the third line.
Historic day. We have first by Garcia, second by Director Joseph. Roll call vote.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Chris Canning,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes, to support my friends from the South County.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Celia Ramos,
Yes.
Paul Doring,
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
I'll second Mayor Sedgley's comment in support of our directors in American Canyon, and I vote yes.
thank you. John Dunbar,
Yes.
motion passes.
All right, thank you, directors. Unanimous vote.
If I may, Director Joseph, Mark, give me a high five.
You guys are somewhat connected on my screen, but you gave a high five in the opposite direction. At least my vantage point.
According to my screen, I just slapped John Dunbar upside the head. But
oh boy! All right. You know what? Historic day. We'll look back at this day and how we came together for better experiences in our local roadways. So thank you all. Let's move on. 12.4, amending the fiscal year 21-22 salary range for Napa Valley Transportation Authority, job classification and program manager engineering. This is found on page 95 to 104. Laura, take it away.
Thank you. One moment while I pull my screen up here. Okay. Thank you, Chair Pedroza. Hello, members of the board. My name is Laura Sanderlin. I oversee human resources here at NVTA. And I'm asking for the board's approval to make an amendment to one of the salary ranges in a job classification within our currently adopted compensation plan. As you all are fairly familiar by now, we have been unsuccessfully recruiting for an engineer position, and since our most recent engineer manager departed our agency in December, we currently have 2 vacancies. And given that the agency is currently involved in delivering almost $100 million in capital projects, it is critical that we fill these positions and that we fill them with quality applicants that can deliver these projects. Staff conducted a focused salary comparison study just last month, so it's very current, specific to the program manager engineering position. And we found that our current range lacks some competitiveness within our labor market. I have it reflected in table 1 within our memo. The salary range is currently the lowest among our partnering agencies. And the board is being asked to approve an amendment in salary range for that program manager engineer position, along with an authorization to offer a hiring incentive up to $20,000. The proposed range would meet but not exceed that of our currently adopted ranges for our Director of Finance and Director of Planning classifications. And that is reflected in attachment 2, which I'll pull up here. It's listed in red, the proposed range, and noted on the bottom is the incremental payment structure for a potential incentive for hiring of this one position. These changes don't have a fiscal impact, as individual offers of employment are based on the candidate's qualifications and their experience. Amending the salary range and authorizing a potential incentive will draw more quality candidates and retain staff that we so desperately need at this critical time with our upcoming projects. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Laura. And again, this is something that it's a function of the moment we're in and trying to get the right person that would save us a lot of money versus if we don't get the right person. So thank you for that. Director Joseph.
And I agree that particularly right now with all the major projects going on, we've got to get the staff, however we can. But in doing the salary analysis, did you look at Solano County next door to us? I'm assuming their salaries are less, or I'm hoping, but did we compare their pay ranges to ours?
We did in our previous salary study. This one was a much smaller compensation study that was focused on the most comparable positions to our engineering classification. So they were not part of this specific structure, but when we adopted for this fiscal year's salary ranges, they were considered part of that compensation study.
Okay, and I bring it up just from a recruitment perspective, that we get a lot of our labor force from Solano County. So we just need to make sure that this new salary schedule is going to be competitive so that, frankly, we can do a better job rating their staff so that we can get our projects done. I suppose I should try to say that nicer, but.
Director Joseph, our counterparts in Solano, Sonoma, and Marin counties, which is largely where we look to get commensurate salary information, are well above even the proposed salary. So I'm just going to let you know now, verify that hopefully we'll be able to get somebody in at that level, because that now is the maximum salary level for everybody below the executive director. And I will also add that your public works directors are paid a lot more than our engineer, and some of them don't have the same level of responsibility in terms of the how large our projects are.
Well, yes, and I noticed Sanjay, I noticed the comment that he moved on to become a public works director and made a lot more money than he was making here, which is a shame and kind of reinforces the whole point of the message, I guess. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Director Joseph. I don't see any other questions. Or do we have any members of the public with questions on this item?
We do not.
All right, I'll bring it back to the board. Entertain a motion.
So moved, Joseph.
All right, first by Joseph.
Second.
Second, Director Knight. Roll call vote, please.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Chris Canning,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Belia Ramos,
Yes.
Paul Doring,
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
Yes.
and John Dunbar.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Laura. Let's move on to item 12.5, Napa Valley Transportation Authority Annual Finance Statement with Independent Audit Report for the years ending June 30th, 2021 to 2020, and Single Audit Report for the Uniform Guidance. This is found on page 105 to 205. Antonio, take it away.
So good afternoon, Chairman Pedroza, members of the board. My name is Antonio Honorado, and I'm the Director of Finance here at the Napa Valley Transportation Authority. Laura, can you bring up the PowerPoint, please?
Yes.
So for this item, staff is asking the board to accept and file the financial statements with independent auditor's report for the fiscal years ending June 30th, 2021 and 2020, which is attachment 2. NVTA single audit report of uniform guidance for the year ending June 30th, 2021, which is attachment 3, and return of allocations, an allocation surplus of $617,772 to a local transportation fund, the LTF fund, which we commonly refer to as our TDA fund as well. So with this PowerPoint, this is going to provide a brief summary of the financial statements for the year, for the current year and the previous year. And if you can go on to the next slide, please. So this report is typically provided to the board annually, and I usually compare year over year and the agency's financial position over the previous year. But of course, COVID threw everything in a tailspin, and a year over year comparison can be a little bit misleading. It doesn't provide a lot of context. So for this, I decided to do a 3-year comparison to summarize 3 years worth of audited financial data. Basically, we have a pre-pandemic year, fiscal year 19. Then we, of course, had a pandemic, the start of the pandemic, which is fiscal year 20. And then for the most current year, fiscal year 21, we focused on recovery efforts and many projects hitting important milestones with a lot of activity attached to it. So if we looked at the first box, the revenue boxes, for the CMA, you can see 7.5 million was generated in the current year. And that was well above fiscal year 20, which had 5.6 million in revenues. But prior to that, there was 7.1 million in fiscal year 19. The dip in fiscal year 20 was mainly attributed to a lull in project expenditures, but not project activity. You heard from Danielle just a few moments ago about the number of projects in the pipeline. Well, there was a lot of pre-construction and design activities in fiscal year 19, mainly for the Vine Trail and for the maintenance facility. Then in fiscal year 20, a lot of those design elements were being refined, and we were seeking project oversight or funding opportunities. And so on a financial basis, we didn't generate as much revenues as we did in the previous year. But in the current year, fiscal year 21, a lot of the CMA revenues were actually associated with the Saskell Junction project, whereas Caltrans reimbursed NVTA for a lot of the design elements and a lot of the consulting fees that were attached to the approval of the project. On the expenditures for public transit, you can see that the level of revenues for fiscal year 19, 20, and 21 noted in the most current fiscal year, we dropped basically from 11.5 million down to just under 10 million. And that was because of the pandemic, the reduced service hours, and really the overall lack of demand for transit as we focused on recovery efforts for the public transit system and all of the transit services we provide to the public. In terms of capital revenues, fiscal year 19, we had some minor capital equipment purchases. Fiscal year 20, that $2 million, 2.1 million, is composed of the real estate purchase of the third lot at Sheehy Court that we have potential for expansion sometime in the future, or to build an traffic operations center out there. And then in fiscal year 21, we had capital investments related to the maintenance facility, as well as the Imola Park and Ride project. And so that's why you see that huge variation between the 3 different years. It's really a function of what type of capital investments are that we procured for in those years. There's really not a lot of rhyme or reason. It's just what's coming to the forefront, and it's what we pay for right then and there. On the expenditure side, on the expenses side, for the most part, again, you see the CMA progressively increase over the 3 years, culminating into the current fiscal year, which, as I said, had a lot of activity, financial activity related to the Saskell Junction project and a lot of pre-construction services that the agency paid for. Public transit expenditures, you see really what's composed of fuel costs and the purchase transportation contract. And in the most current year, we see a dip in expenses, mainly because of the reduced services and the lack of demand for public transit, at least for the early part of fiscal year 21. On the capital side, pretty much the same. Had some incremental purchases in fiscal year 19, real estate purchase in fiscal year 20, and then made investments in the Umola Park and Ride and the bus maintenance facility in the current fiscal year. I always have depreciation as a separate line item to show you just the depreciation is really a bookkeeping item. It's an accounting treatment, and it's hard to glean information about the type of expenses when you commingle in depreciation. So I always strip that out as a separate line item just to show the cost of the depreciated value of our assets over time. Going down to net position shows the CMA. We've been pretty consistent in our net position, basically our cash on hand for the last 3 fiscal years. The last year, there's much more activity, as I mentioned, and so you see a little bit of a dip in our cash reserves, cash on hand, I should say, unrestricted cash on hand. For public transit, you see, we maintain our assets for the last 2 years, and then it dipped a little bit in fiscal year 20, and that really is because of the depreciation expense affected our net position. But overall, we've been in this tight range of between $23 million and as high as $27 million in previous years in terms of our total net position. Next slide, please. So this just shows you general fund revenues and expenditures. Expenditures, as I said, well, let me go back. Expenditures, 1/3 of our expenditures for the general fund is related to personnel, and about 2/3 is related to consulting services and administrative overhead of maintaining the agency's operations. But those consulting services, as I said, and as Danielle has mentioned in her presentation, was Umola Park and Ride, American Canyon PID, bus maintenance facility, and Saskell Junction all put together. On the revenue side, usually TDA makes up about 40% of our revenue generations. In this case here, state/Caltrans actually makes up more than half this time around. And as I said, that's because of Saskell Junction and our reimbursements from Caltrans for those pre-construction and design services that we pay for, but we're reimbursed by Caltrans. You notice our revenues came in a little bit lower than expenditures, and that's because in our first year of our biennial budget, we accumulate funds, and then second year of our biennial budget, we spend down those funds. So there was a little, we didn't recognize as much revenues in the current year as we did in the previous year because we've already had the funding to pay for some of those services under transportation projects. Next slide, please. I always have a little bit of a soundbite about the NVTA's long-term obligations, mainly for pension and OPEB funding. Our NVTA's CalPERS pension plan total is about 75% funded, which is similar to the previous year, but it's still higher than the statewide average of 70%. Ideally, we want to be up in the 90s, but we meet all our obligations as directed by CalPERS. And overfunding the pension obligations may mean that money may be better used on projects that may generate a higher rate of return rather than putting it away in a pension fund. So there really is a cost benefit analysis when seeing how much of our pension funding there is and how much we should contribute on an annual basis. But as I've said, we meet all our CalPERS pension obligations annually. As for OPEB funding, fully funded 100%. We actually have not drawn on the OPEB fund since its inception back in 2011. And that is really because there hasn't been that many retirees to fund their pension costs, their OPEB costs, excuse me. We currently have 3 active retirees where our cash outlays have been about $12,000 this current year. So the agency has been able to absorb those outlays. I think when we get to 4 active retirees, we'll start drawing upon our OPEB funding to reimburse the agency for those cash outlays. The fund itself has been generating about 20% annually in terms of growth. So we're kind of leaving it alone and let it accumulate, as we move along with every year. Next slide, please. So on the public transit side, this is a little bit of a snapshot of our current year expenditures and revenues. On the expenditure side, purchase transportation and fuel composes about 75% of the cost. Depreciation, non-cash item, 21%, and there's about 5% for administrative and personnel chargebacks. On the revenue side, I want to draw your attention to the box down below to show you our funding sources for the current year as opposed to the previous year. And this is where the federal stimulus had a big impact on our revenues. Usually our TDA funds composes about between 40 to 50% of our revenues for public transit operating assistance. This time around, TDA composed only about 1/3, whereas federal sources jumped almost to 50%. And that was the impact of the CARES Act and the CRISA fundings, and a little bit of I'll talk about it in the next slide, but it shows you how FTA funding and TDA funding virtually flipped year over year. And that was due to the 3 rounds of federal stimulus that we received. In terms of fare box and state or regional sources, that had, that decreased year over year. And that's mainly because of our state transit assistance. We didn't receive as much in the current year as we did in the previous year, based on diesel fuel consumption taxes, which, as you know, most people chose to remain at home or work remotely. And so that consumption was not as great as in previous years. And our regional Measure 2 bridge toll funding that we get for Route 29 that goes to the El Cerrito del Norte BART station, those funds were curtailed too because of the pandemic and because of the lack of bridge tolls that were collected in fiscal year 21. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of a chart of how the federal stimulus funding trickled down to NVTA and what we received in fiscal year 20, what we received in the current fiscal year 21, and what we're expected to receive in fiscal year 22, which is actually current now. I'm not, and one more year out. You can see we'll receive $10.6 million in total federal stimulus funding. You can see the breakout that we received directly from FTA, about $9.7 million. And we received about $900,000 from Caltrans. I will say Caltrans is holding on to some American Recovery Act funds. And we may be allocated some of that funding, but that's still a little bit about a year out, I would say, in terms of the allocation, and a funding amount to NVTA hasn't been determined yet. But there is still a chance that we may receive some federal stimulus funding from Caltrans 1 or 2 years out, I would say. Next slide, please. So capital purchases in the fiscal year that just ended. We made some capital investments in the Mola Park and Ride, as you know, and the bus maintenance facility. Obviously, those 2 projects have gained momentum this year, reaching critical mass this year. And so the Mola Park and Ride will will be completed hopefully by the end of the fiscal year. And the bus maintenance facility, we started construction on January 4th. And that is and we expect to be in service, keeping our fingers crossed, perhaps in the fall of 2023. So about a year and a half out still, 2 years out. And then we also made some purchases of bus shelters that will serve the Manzanita housing project once we get the Proterra electric bus deliveries later on this summer. You have a management letter that's attached to the board memo, and there were no current year findings or recommendations. So really it's them telling us that we're doing everything. We're compliant basically. So next slide, please. Just to recap, we're asking you to accept and file the financial statements for the year and the return of $617,000 and $617,772 to the local transportation fund. That concludes my report, and I can answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you very much, Antonio, for that. Directors, do we have any questions? I don't see any from any directors at this time. So, Laura, do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
All right. And I'll bring it back to the board. If there's no further questions, I'll entertain it. And do we need two separate motions here? One to accept the financial statements and then one to return the allocation surplus?
At the board's pleasure, can be done together or separately.
We like to be efficient, so let's do it together. So I will entertain a motion.
So moved, Garcia.
First by Garcia.
I'll second. Joseph?
Second by Joseph. Roll call vote, please.
Leo Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Chris Canning,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Belia Ramos,
Yes.
Paul Doring,
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
Yes.
John Dunbar.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you very much, directors. Let's move on. 12.6 is Napa Valley Transportation Authority fiscal year mid-year review and delegation of authority matrix. Roxanna, take it away.
Good afternoon. Just pulling up my screen 1 second. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint? So good afternoon. I am Roxanna Marati, Senior Financial Analyst at NVTA. I will be presenting item 12.6, which is NVTA's fiscal year 21-22 mid-year review and delegated authority matrix. This slide is a summary of the financial performance. Attachment 1 has additional line items in your packet. Overall, the agency is performing as expected. Like prior years, there are some timing issues related to project costs and reimbursements, but those will also be those are smoothed out for mid-year as well as year-end. In addition, NVTA participated in the Tyler Technologies, Tyler Munis implementation with the county. It's a new financial system that some of you may be aware about. And that really allowed us to look at all of our data, and it was a really good exercise. Projects are well underway now in Q3, so capital improvement expenses will be incurred mostly in the second half of the year, as you've heard from our planning team thus far in today's meeting. Moving on to the CMA review. CMA revenues of about $3.5 million represents about 25% of the budget thus far. Federal revenues were comprised of CMA grants reimbursements, state and regional revenues were comprised of Caltrans reimbursements for projects such as Saskell Junction. And other revenues represent salary chargebacks from the transit fund and interest. CMA expenditures of about 2.7 million represent 19% of the expense budget, but are expected to be close to budget by the end of the fiscal year. Consulting services represents the largest category there at 46%, and mainly includes costs related to Saskell Junction, Vine Trail design, and right-of-way services, State Route 29 improvements, TIFIA loan consulting, other legislative consulting, and vehicle miles traveled modeling. Personnel is the second largest category at 40% of CMA expenditures, trending slightly below par of 50% due to the vacancies that Laura spoke about earlier. And administration costs include other operations costs such as audit expenses, county service chargebacks, legal services, software, building, maintenance costs, insurance, utilities, printing, etc. Everything else that it takes to run our agency. Public transit revenues totaled 6.6 million by mid-year, representing about 57% of the overall revenue budget of 11.7 million. The largest share of revenues is federal funds, which is comprised of the stimulus funding for transit operations that Tony touched about earlier. We're still drawing this down in this fiscal year. NVTA received most of its TDA funding in the first half of the year, so it may not be as large of a share of the next time we make a report on this. State and regional funding is comprised of Regional Measure 2 funding, and Farebox makes up about 3% of total revenues thus far. It's doing slightly better than last year at this time. And moving on to expenses, which totaled 4.9 million or 42% of the budget. The largest share was purchase transportation costs or TransDev operations costs. And even with the newly adopted contract amendment with TransDev, it is anticipated that this category will still be under budget by year end due to the decreased services from recent driver shortages. The second highest expense is fuel, maintenance, and insurance. Fuel is slightly above budget in part due to rising fuel prices, as others have spoken about today. Additionally, there have been some software maintenance costs associated with the on-demand app and public transit capital purchases that include the new computer-aided dispatched automatic vehicle locator system. Personnel represents staff charges specifically to public transit activities, and administration represents other operational costs such as printing, bank charges, utilities, all of that. And lastly, the staff report item for 12.6 includes the delegated authority matrix, which included about $161,000 of contractual obligations through delegated authority. And that represents anything over $5,000 and under $50,000. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Roxana, for that. Directors, any questions? I don't see any. Laura, do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
All right, with that, I'll bring it back to the board. And I believe this was, do we need a motion for approval here, or was this just to receive a report?
We do not need a motion.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, Roxana, thank you very much. Let's move on to 12.7. Swanson Foraging land habitat for Sosco Junction, page 214 to 293. Danielle Schmidt, take it away.
Yes, Danielle Schmidt's here to present item 12.7, Swainson Hawk foraging habitat credit for Sosco Junction. The action before the board today is to authorize the executive director to enter into and make minor modifications to the Muzzy Ranch Conservation Bank to acquire credit for 17.34 acres of Swainson Hawk foraging habitat in order to fulfill the California Department Fish and Wildlife requirements to construct Sosco Junction. I know this feels like a little bit of a deja vu because last month I brought before the board the nesting tree credit. So this is in addition to the nesting tree credit. And there are two parts to the incidental take permit with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so one was the nesting tree credit and the second is the foraging habitat. NVTA has been working with Caltrans biology staff as well as CDFW to obtain permission for the project service area credit for Muzzy Ranch to meet the needs of our Swainson Hawk foraging habitat. And this, with the execution of this contract, we will then meet our ITP credits for California endangered species. And so we would be done with that portion of mitigation for Sosco Junction. Alternatives would be the board could decide not to execute the contract with Muzzy Ranch, and the agency, meaning NVTA and Caltrans, would have to work together to secure suitable land that has the correct habitat landscape that would be suitable for a Swainson hawk. And this would require more time and money, and we would have to set up an endowment fund, which could cost the agency millions. So even though the price tag of I believe it's $443,000 seems quite steep, it is reasonable and within what Caltrans is calling normal realm of what they've seen out there for other similar type mitigation purchases. The strategic goals met by this proposal is to promote Napa County's economic sustainability. So once constructed, Sosco Junction will create jobs and will relieve travel time and increase travel time savings for workers, goods, and services, as well as the use of taxpayers' dollars efficiently. Executing the Muzzy Ranch contract will allow the project to move forward and not delay time and resources. So with that, I will conclude my report and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you very much. I see Director Joseph, go ahead.
Just a quick comment. I'm glad that we're getting all of this stuff taken care of because the project's really critical. And as Executive Director Miller pointed out earlier in the meeting, we are up by about $3 or $4 million as far as the bid for the project. So I'm comfortable with our ability to cover the cost of this mitigation. And so whatever we can do to protect a Swanson's hawk is important in order to get this project going. So I'm okay with it.
All right. Any other questions from?
So I just also want to clarify, if I may, that this is not the end of our mitigation on this project. We still have the California red-legged frog that we need to mitigate for. So hold on tight. That's the good news.
This is the end of the California mitigation. So in our incidental take permit with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, this was the only species, the Swainson hawk, that was identified. Director Miller is correct. There are other mitigations and potential cultural resources that we would have to mitigate for. But for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, this would satisfy the ITP that we executed with them.
Great. Any other questions, directors? Or do we have any members of the public with public comment on this?
We do not.
All right, so let's proceed. This was an action item though, correct? So I will look for a motion.
Dunbar moves the item.
All right, we have first by Dunbar,
Second, Ellsworth.
second Ellsworth. Roll call vote, please.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Chris Canning,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley, Mayor Sedgley, are you on? I'll come back. Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Belia Ramos,
Yes.
Paul Doring,
Yes.
Jeff Ellsworth,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
Yes.
John Dunbar,
Yes.
and Scott Sedgley.
Yes, I'm back. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, thank you, directors. Let's move on to 12.8 federal and state legislative update. Director Miller.
Thank you very much. Pull up my document. There we go. So I'm just going to make this very quick. Since the president signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which has now become more popularly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill, the Biden administration has announced several programs, including the EV Charging Action Plan, which was announced by Vice President Kamala Harris, $52.5 billion in federal highway apportionment for fiscal year 2022, which is significantly higher than prior years, and a $260 million program for highway safety. The Biden administration also released issued the Building a Better America guidebook, which basically articulates and provides information about the bill. And when I say the bill, I mean the BIL. Secretary Buttigieg announced the National Roadway Safety Strategy intended to address roadway fatalities and injuries. The BIL includes a total of $10 billion for infrastructure to address safety issues and $4 billion to improve crash data and truck safety programs. The notice of funding opportunity for the 2022 Rebuilding American Infrastructure and Sustainability and Equity, or RAISE grant, was announced. It's going to provide $1.5 billion for transportation infrastructure. NVTA will be pursuing somewhere between 14 and maybe $20 million to complete the funding gap on the Up Valley, Napa Valley Forward State Route 29 intersection improvements. On the state side, the Legislative Analyst Office releases preliminary overview of the governor's budget and is estimating a $29 billion surplus, which is about $8 billion more than the governor's budget. And the discrepancy is largely due to governor not counting some of the discretionary funding. As reported last month, there's $9.1 billion in the governor's budget earmarked for transportation. And in your packet is a letter drafted by MTC staff in coordination with the Bay Area Partnership to the governor. And it articulates Bay Area priorities for this $9 billion. Two bills introduced by Assembly Member Chu last year have been taken up by two other legislators. Key is the AB 629, that's Becker, intended to improve coordination among the Bay Area transit operators. And we are waiting for the final language on that, and we'll discuss that in a future board meeting. Also, AB 550 Friedman, authorizing specified cities to test automated speed enforcement cameras. And then, as Danielle mentioned, the executive directors of the 4 North Bay County transportation agencies have been working with MTC staff and Senator Dodd's staff to draft language for a bill to introduce tolling on State Route 37. Don't have a bill number yet. We have some draft language. I'm going to wait until it's introduced, and I will also share that with the board. Happy to answer any questions.
All right, directors, any questions? All right, Laura, do we have any members of the public?
We do not.
All right, this is an action item. Or no, this was just us receiving this report. Thank you, Director Miller. All right, any future agenda items? Don't see any. We do have need for closed session. This is Public Employee Performance Evaluation, go to Government Code Section 54957B1, title Executive Director. And we also have conference with Labor Negotiator, Government Code Section 54957.6, Authority Designated Representative, Authority Chair, Unrepresented Employee, Executive Director. So, Deanne, remind me, did we properly disclose the closed
You
session?
did. You did a
Wonderful.
very good job.
All right.
And I
Now,
believe you'll
go
be
ahead.
moved in. And if you want me to join you, just text me or let me know if there's any questions or anything to come up, or I can go in and then leave at your
Why
discretion.
don't you just, if you could go in, and then we'll go from there. So is everyone going to, are we moving to a different room or is there a different link?
We will be moving you to a breakout room momentarily, so just sit tight.
And just want to confirm there's no public comment on this closed session agenda item.
All right. So no one do anything. We're going to be moved into the room. Kate, why don't you join as well and send with Deanne, and then we'll go from there.
And may I suggest a 2-minute break as we join the room?
Yes, so everyone join the room.
Get up.
Go take a break, and we'll see you there in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I think we got returned somehow, Laura, to the main room. I don't think this is closed session anymore.
No, I think
It is not, it, for some reason, it decided to accept some people and boot everybody out after 60 seconds. So
are we okay?
We will get everybody moved over momentarily.
Thank you. All right, so we are not in closed session.
Correct.
Make sure I have enough power.
Laura, just so you know, we are viewing your screen on your agenda, which is fine, but so you're aware.
Oh, thank you. We actually have a different staff member sharing it, so it's theirs, but yes, thank you.
Okay, it looks like the board members are moved over. We are still live streaming on YouTube.
Yes, we are.
Reminder.
Okay, great. Everything looks good. I'm going to go on mute while we wait. Thanks, Kathy.
All right, Laura, we are back from closed session and you tell me when we're ready to go.
All right, just one moment. Okay, everyone is back.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are back from our closed session. We do not have any reportable action. So at this point, we're going to move on to adjourning to our next meeting, which is March 16th, 2022. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.